These are the same reports that you certify for in the year one, with the exception of the two new ones, 16.9 and 16.10. And so we have this map Chiron usually makes for us to help tell us the report relationships. Of course, the orange are always the aggregate reports. These are the ones that have to be certified. And so we have 16.1 and it's supported through 16.3. The supporting reports give us the record details. And for special education, those are student record details, right? And 16.3 also reports 16.2. So we'll talk about each report here shortly. Then 16.5 is the services report, and it's supported by 16.16. And then, of course, we have two new reports. These are for the exits. And remember, we emphasized Fall 1 doesn't account for students exiting special education programs. That's one of the specific purposes of this data collection. And so we've added reports to reflect that. And that's 16.9 and 16.10. Again, the aggregate report is the count and the different exits. And then the student list, how you would verify your count, is 16.10. And then introduced last year were our post-secondary outcome report, 17.3 and 17.4. And we'll go through real quickly, because more than just talking about reports that you've seen before, Chiron can show you how to use the mapping guides, and that's what this is an image of. You guys won't have report logic in CALPADS or the numbered columns. This screenshot is from the mapping guides. But 16.1 is the student's disability count by education plan by primary disability type, right? And so it's just going to tell you which students have an IEP, ISP, whether they're pending or IFSP, what type of education plan they have, how many students have this plan, and then buckets for the different type of primary disability types, okay? And then 16.2 is the students with disabilities count by federal setting. And so you see those primary disabilities in column 3. And then we're looking at that primary disability and seeing what setting they're in. And so this is how you can account to make sure your students are in the most appropriate setting. If there's any specific group of students that are not being provided adequate services, right? It's a very important report. You want to, like I said, federal government uses this report to determine the least restrictive environment. And then at the very end, the last 3 columns on the right, the general education participation range, right? How much percentage of time, which category do they fall in as far as they're in general education with students that are not in special education or not students with disabilities. And then you have report 16.3, students with disability list. This just supports those previous 2 reports. And this is how you do your verification, right? It's more extensive. You have greater detail into those records submitted and how they're listed. I do believe triennial records do not show up on this report. At one point they did, but I think there was a change to the report logic that it has to be an initial or an annual. That may not be true for EOY 4 since it's the entire year and not census day, but that's something to look forward, and Chiron can show you how to verify which record is supposed to show up on these reports here shortly. 16.5, students with disabilities, student services. So again, this is your aggregate report for the services. It's by service category, right? And then what is their primary disability? So these are the services the students are getting. This is the reason why they're getting the service, right? That's what this report is supposed to tell us. And then report 16.6 is the student report, right? So not only does it tell us the student's primary disability and what service they're getting, it gives us the details of how frequent the service is, who's the service provider, what's the duration of the service, right? And so again, this is the supporting report that gives you the detail from 16.5. So you're not just looking at numbers and don't understand the relevance or the meaning. Again, this is where you have to do critical thinking, right? To identify before your SELPA can, are there's any discrepancy, is something reported incorrectly? Or better yet, how can we better serve our students? Is there a better environment? Do these specific students need a different type of service or more frequent service? And then you have report 17.3, post-secondary outcome. And you see it's real small. There's only 2 columns, right? How many students have this outcome? Because for your students with disability, the post-secondary status code is the primary, most important field. And that's, again, just describing what they're doing after they've left secondary education. And then a list of those students, general demographic information. But again, the most important thing would be column 9, post-secondary status. And then a new report, which has been mocked up. I haven't seen this report yet. It's the disability program exits. And you can see that we only have 4 exit reasons. This is it. There's nothing else. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, if you read the title, no longer eligible, maximum age, withdraw, no parent consent, or student died, this ends eligibility, right? With the exception of the student dying, that's not specifically ending eligibility. That's it. And so there's been changes from the last year to this year on who and what students should be exit. But again, if the student has not lost eligibility, they may have dropped out, but they haven't lost eligibility. They may transfer to a different school, but they didn't lose eligibility. That's something to really make sure your local practices are in line with that guidance. And then 16.10, students with disabilities program exit list that just supports those exit. You can look at each student name by name, line by line, and see why they exited. You can compare the enrollment record. You can see if that is in fact true, right? Maybe they've enrolled at a different school and have resumed their special education services. But, you know, it's a new report. I'm sure we'll learn its use in time more specifically, but that's it for the reports, Kyron.
Okay,
Before we do the wrap up, yeah.
So the 16.9 and 10 is already in test environment, so I'm just trying to run it. But let me just share my screen right now. So I just wanted to highlight how to look at how to take advantage of the CALPADS report mapping guides in defining where the data came from, in investigating the data. So let's say you have here, okay, we have the 16.9. So let's say where you're looking at 16.1. So click on that. It brings up this section, and you have different counts, and you wonder, okay, where does CalPAS get this information from? So to help you with that, you just go to the CalPAS user manual, go to report mapping guide, and then depending on the type of report you're looking at, you have your snapshots. If you're a SELPA, you have your SELPA mapping guide. If you're a county looking at reports, you have your county authorizing. So for an LEA, I click on this.
So why are you selecting snapshot reports if you're coming from the certification screen?
Because the certification screen employs the snapshot version of the reports. This is basically that's the snapshot version. We're not looking at ODS version. We're not looking at SELPA reports. Basically, the certification version is equivalent to the snapshot version on the reports. So, okay, so where was that? End of year 4. And we look at the aggregates. So by clicking on 16.1, it gives you the different, data elements that are involved on this report. So you have your filters. You also have the actual report logic. So I'm looking at this code. So it just shows you what part of the SPED field was this reported in. So this is essentially the disability code. And so looking at one student, So this is the disability code. So you have your 10, you have your 1. So essentially, this is the actual disability code that you reported for the student on the SPED record. Okay. So that's speech, language, and 1. So all of the disability codes are laid out on each of those columns, and whoever students you reported with that code will reflect on that report. So, and
And
this is unduplicated, by the way.
right, and I'm glad you pointed that out because that's where I was going to jump in. Um, Students may have multiple disability codes in their record, and you may be wondering how come that's not represented in the report. Well, it says unduplicated, which is going to suggest that the student's going to be reported just one time. It also emphasizes disability code 1, not disability code 2, and it has a field type that you can reference in the CFS. But also with the mapping guides is the selection criteria, and that's how you identify which records are going to be included.
This
Kyron
part
does it.
here.
Yeah, Kyron does a good job of having from the report specs and gets help from the analysts. They usually have to reword it so it's English because it's a lot of technical jargon initially, but it tells you which records are going to be included in the report. So if you can see in the middle, Kyron, it says meeting type is not triennial.
There you go. Yeah,
Right.
you were telling that earlier that triennials are not included on the report, and so this indicates that that part that Nate
They're only
mentioned.
looking at annual and initial records.
Mhm.
Sometimes I can't remember, but this is certainly where you would go to identify what records before you jump to conclusions, say this isn't right. You want to understand the report definition and then the basic selection criteria. And then you could use the table below to map what students or why the records are included if the data is right.
Yeah.
And this is very good because sometimes it doesn't generate correctly. There's issues. And a lot of LEAs say, hey, man, your report's broke, Mr. CALPADS. And since
And
I'm Nathan
so,
Holmes, Kyron's Mr. CALPADS, I just forward those tickets to him.
not me, we all forward it to Alex, to the level 2 analyst for them to
Mrs.
be.
CALPADS.
So
Very funny.
yeah, so if you run all, if you look at 16.1 and you're certain that the specs are right but your data is wrong, or the report is wrong at least, then you can go to help, look at the current known issues, and do a control F. Okay, does report 16.1 have some errors? Then if there's none, then I guess you send in a ticket saying, hey, we have this issue. Maybe this is a new bug. And so we investigate, and then we then confirm, and it gets posted on the CalPADS error list the next day. So that's, the process that we normally do. And this is the process that we should also do. So you don't just, I would suggest really studying the mapping guides, making sure that your data matches or if there's discrepancy before sending in a ticket to CalPAS. Or even if you really need clarification, you can always send in a service ticket. And so going back to the reports, if you click on the cell on this column here, it should bring up the detail section 16.3. And so it gives you all of this information that was aggregated for 16.1. So that's basically, you have all of your data. And again, the CalPADS user manual has that information. You can click on 16.3 and it gives you all of the same information here. So take advantage of all of this resource that we are offering, and we provide you. If there are still information that is lacking here, please feel free to send us a request, and we could add those functionalities at least on the user manual or some other tool that we could provide you. So Nate.
Yep. Thank you, Kyron.